welcome to the Jumpstart Your Data webcast from Stratiam, featuring Chemmy Alcott of BBC Ski Sunday and a multiple Olympic ski racer. My name is Mark Chillingworth, European CIO Community Editor, and it's my pleasure to be hosting today's webcast. In a video that is part of this, Stratiam CEO Peter Joe undergoes wind tunnel testing with Chemmy Alcott, and the ski racer makes a really pertinent observation. We can still make improvements to our performance despite the pandemic using data, which will then help us make rapid gains. As organisations and society prepares for a return to global health, they too can in effect put their business or their organisations into a wind tunnel and make performance improvements in readiness for the better times that we all sincerely hope are ahead. And we're going to explore that theme throughout today's webcast. In all of these events, we welcome your feedback, and in return, there is a prize draw for giving your feedback on today's event from ski apparel provider EcoSki. There's gloves, ski packs, glasses, and of course board wax, all of which will help jumpstart your ski performance when we can all return to the slopes. So please do enter, give us some feedback, because that is really helpful for us. I'm now joined by Peter Joe, Anthony Osborn, and Chemmy Alcott to discuss the findings that they took from the wind tunnel. We have seen a great deal of technology-led change in the last year, and as we lead towards recovery, do you agree that organisations will need to really optimise their technology and business operations in that journey towards a return to health? Peter, I'll start with you, if I may.
Yes, I do, Mark. I think even before that, really, if you look back 2 or 3 years ago, some companies had actually recognised that they needed to do more on the technology front. So we see a lot on digital transformation. We're working with lots of clients on that part of their business planning. But also personally, we actually took a decision 3 or 4 years ago to go into the cloud, and that's helped us. I mean, even before the pandemic, we were driving quite a lot of business efficiencies through the business. So we put all of our call center into the cloud, all of our back office systems, and actually a lot of our development is done in the cloud as well. So actually everything is cloud based. Cloud first is what we decided to do, and that's basically meant we've been able to carry on working pretty normally. And we've also helped some of our other clients do the same. As a good example of local authority we've helped, and they actually said to us that had it not been for the cloud transformation we helped them with, that they wouldn't have been able to carry on providing services to their residents. So whilst it tends to be a bit sporadic in terms of where you see those performance improvements, there are good examples of companies that have done that very well, and it has made a big difference, because obviously everybody's working from home now. So if you've got a good experience working from home, you can carry on delivering great service to your clients.
And Chemmy, how about the business community of the ski world? Is that having to prepare and use technology to return?
I think strangely, athletes and organisations in sport have been using data in this way to capture performance for around 15 to 20 years, even when I was an athlete. But everyone is having to mould and adapt. For instance, another hat that I wear is I'm a ski coach of a part-time race club. A lot of our peers are full-time. So we're trying to compete against full-time clubs that are already based in Europe. The kids are going to school there. And so we've had to really adapt, because it's a very personal business, coaching an athlete. You know, it's all hands-on, it's very much face-to-face. So we've had to adapt from the simple of doing fitness over Zoom to giving them new ways of acquiring skills. So one of the things that I do is I ask the athletes to watch ski racing live without sound, so that they understand how an athlete is faster by commentating themselves for their parents. So they're picking up skill level in the pandemic, which they wouldn't have done otherwise, but they're just learning about what makes a technically fast ski racer. And obviously during lockdown, we've had varying degrees of tiers, and sometimes the dry slopes have opened up and we've been able to do some one-on-one. There's ski simulators, which I found really incredible to get the movements going, to get some data whilst they're not on snow, to see if their angles of their right turn are similar to their left. And there's a lot of different ways that we've had to adapt as a business in this pandemic. And I think that's filtered right from, you know, the international elite level of skiing, even though they're on snow, they've had to adapt massively, to, you know, local clubs like mine. And it's just a different way of keeping the mental skill of an athlete developed whilst they can't be on snow. And it's been a challenge, but it's been quite exciting to see. And when we go back to normality, to see if we can compete, because we've had to look at different ways of performance data for our athletes whilst they're at home, whilst they're homeschooling. And it'll be really interesting if that has kept us in touch with the world leaders.
That self-commentary thing is fascinating, because that makes you be much more observant, doesn't it? Because when we all watch sport, whatever our sport addiction is, we let the commentator dictate it to us to a degree, and we all have our favourite commentator. But if you take that off and you've got to observe and you've got to inform, that's going to really raise up your perception levels, isn't it?
And you know, it's marginal gains. Some of these races are being won by 100, 200. So to say to these athletes, right, you tell me, why is that racer better than that racer? And they've got to look at the tactics, the technique, the strengths. And it's so exciting in ski racing, because we work on the mechanics of that individual. So whether they've got a long back and short legs, or short legs and a long back, their skill level is different. So I think each athlete at home, whether they're a teenager or they're professional, they can go, okay, this is an athlete who has my, you know, height, my body weight, my body frame. This is how I have to emulate it. And it's them kind of coaching themselves. And I think taking ownership of that responsibility for both businesses, individuals, athletes is really important.
Fantastic. Anthony, I mean, Chemmy raised some really interesting points there, didn't he? And building on that perception point, how are you seeing organisations improve their ability to perceive themselves, to understand? I mean, they've been through one of the biggest significant changes in history, and going back is going to be another significant change in business history in many ways.
Yeah, so there's a lot of challenges with efficiency. So in some ways, the pandemic showed us all that we could work from home, and there were some efficiencies there. The commute went, the working day structure changed, but it also introduced a lot of inefficiencies. Multiple Zoom meetings lasting too long. One that was interesting for me was maybe inefficiencies around data sharing. So previously you might have been able to have a collective of people sharing their data in a boardroom situation. So you might have your finance data, you might have your website's data, you might have your server data, and those people would meet in a boardroom and be able to share those things on a whiteboard or discuss them. Those have kind of been taken away a bit with the pandemic. So there's a lot of inefficiencies with working with data. So I guess for what we're trying to do with Stratiam, the product Intergence, of combining different data sources into a single model that everyone can view as a single source of truth, becomes really paramount. That kind of way of working, sharing data, and all collaborating on the same thing.
Peter, the term disruption has been massively overused in recent years, and the pandemic was a true disruption. It's disrupted everything. How have you seen the organisations you work with use their data to cope with disruption and both survive, but maybe even thrive?
Well, as alluded to earlier, I think some have done better than others. And I think there's 2 points to make here. So we help lots of organisations with digital transformation. So that's right across from, you know, the networks, the infrastructure, right through to the, you know, the customer, the front end. And I think that if you look at the companies that have done well, and there's some great examples, you know, the ASOSs and people like that, they really have understood the customers and the customer journeys. There's also some interesting analysis out there about the success or failure of digital transformations, and I think it was Forrester said that 70% of digital transformations fail. And I was having an interesting conversation with Chemmy about that, because I think this is something we've got to try and move away from, not the whole failure thing, but actually to move towards actually, well, there's a 70% chance of improving that performance rather than looking at it as success and failure. And I think that's something we've got to get across as business people. But for sure, there's a lot more that we can be doing on the digital front. And this is where I think Stratiam really can help businesses, because one of the things that's been missing for us has been very much this plotting your whole journey from start to finish and being able to measure your own performance and focus on those things that are important, where you can really get, as Chemmy mentioned, those marginal gains or even big performance gains. And this is something that we found, Chemmy, wasn't it, when we were in the wind tunnel, was actually what a difference various things can make. And the Stratiam data really helped hone on those areas that can make a difference. So Stratiam will help you on the digital transformation front. So you've got some really great analytics from start to finish. But also operationally, we've used it ourselves with our internal when we're providing services to customers. So we've actually, for example, from an operational perspective, managed to save 40% of our tickets, because there's lots of correlation that Stratiam will provide that will again allow you to pinpoint those real performance gains.
Chemmy, are we seeing more and more athletes and sports people using data and wind tunnels and those sort of methods? And did they adopt it more because of the pandemic, or was it a trend that was happening anyway?
Yeah, I think athletes and sport is a world that's been using data for decades in order to improve performance. But like Peter said, we've got to get away from this culture of failure and seeing, red flagged areas, which is something I have a big deal with, calling an area red flagged when it's an opportunity for improvement. As you all know, I talk about the athlete and inside a big performance cog of circle. And if one of those areas is not flowing as well as the rest, then that athlete in the middle will underperform. And for us, we've always seen that as a huge opportunity for improvement. You want someone to come in, if you're ranked 20th in the world, and go, okay, all of this is great, 90% is great, but this 10%, we can improve you here. And like we saw in the wind tunnel, I changed my helmet from what I've raced with for 20 years to a helmet used by speed skiers. Jan Farrell is one of the best speed skiers Britain's ever had. And he lent us this kind of Star Wars looking crazy aerodynamic helmet. You could only see out the front of your eyes. It was actually quite unpleasant to wear, wasn't it, Peter? And we put it on, and in the wind tunnel, without changing anything else, just the helmet, we had an 8% improvement in aerodynamics. Now 8% by changing a helmet, I'm thinking I missed out on gold medal in the Olympics multiple times with an 8% improvement. So I'm going, why didn't I wear one of these? Well, the practical of that is I couldn't actually turn in that helmet. It's definitely made to go in a straight line, and it would have been great. But then I start to think, okay, what small adjustments can I make? Even if they're a 3-4% improvement, I would have been right up there with the best in the world. So I think, first of all, we need to get away from seeing criticism or areas where we're underperforming and taking it personally as failure. That is wrong. All we want to do in business and in sport as coaches or people supporting businesses to grow is to show you areas where you need to focus your energy. So 90% of your business is great. You don't need to even think about that. But this area here, this is a huge opportunity for improvement. And when we see that, it's a green light to go, hell's blazing, right, I'm going to focus on this, and then I will have a percentage improvement, which in business could be massive, or in sport for me could have been an Olympic gold.
Yeah, and I think the other thing as well to say on top of that is that, for those of you that are also Formula One fans, and I know Chemmy is as well, is that, if you go back to the 1950s, they were taking somewhere in the region of 37 seconds to change a tyre, whereas I think 2014, Red Bull got the world record for, I think, 1.9 seconds. And the key thing there is that within the team, there are sub-teams, and they decided that this was particular an area they could improve the performance. So that's an incredible example of how you can actually focus on particular areas. One of the things that we don't do, and Anthony's just alluded to it earlier, we could do better on, is the whole issue about how teams interwork from an IT and business perspective, because there are silos of data. And actually this is where Stratiam can really help, because it helps collaboration between teams, because there is one source of data truth. And that is actually really valuable. And I think it's something that, again, we can do better on, and that's where Stratiam can really help.
I agree, and actually, it's a cultural thing, isn't it? And in a previous life, I got to interview the CIO of McLaren, and he took me around the factory and showed me a mock pit bay that they'd built, and they'd covered it in GoPro cameras. And then they physically wheeled a car in, did a pit stop and wheeled it out, and then all went away and watched all the different angles of GoPro footage. so that the mechanics, to your point exactly, Peter, could self-analyze and say, actually, I can shave off 10th of a second if the hammer is 10 centimeters to my right or left or whatever. And again, that's exactly that culture point, isn't it? The IT department bringing forward home gadgets, GoPros, and then providing the ability for the organisation to analyse itself and improve its performance.
Yeah, and the other thing which Chemmy said as well earlier, which is exactly the same, the Formula One teams do, is that there's probably 8 or 12 people involved in a wheel change, but actually occasionally they make mistakes. But no one blames that individual. It's a kind of, okay, we've made a mistake. How do we learn from that? How do we improve from it? And I think that's something, again, in business, we can learn from the way that athletes and professional sports people think, which is a much more positive way, as you said, Chemmy, to actually focus on performance improvements and performance gains.
And Anthony, how do you see the data culture to drive exactly what Peter and Chemmy have just alluded to use the right data and develop their own skills?
So I think that it does require a bit of a cultural shift. So if you wind back 10, 20 years or whatever, departments would own their own data sets. So IT departments might look after servers, sales departments might look after the CRM data, and you'd have web analysts looking after website data and stuff. I think there needs to be a shift away from saying, no, we don't own our data. It's going to be collaborative, and that does take a mindset shift. But if you can do that, the benefits are absolutely huge. With shared data, you can see things like a correlation of a server going down and how its impact might be on the sales, how the performance of the website data is doing, or you might see a lack of leads in the CRM and see how that impacts sales and various things like that. So it's the interplay of lots of different data sources that you can get lots of value from. And I guess that relates in Chemmy's world as well. Like previously, weather data might have sat somewhere, and ski and snow conditions might have existed somewhere else. And then you've got manufacturers telling you what their kind of resistance is on the surface of their blades, or I don't know, I'm talking about metrics that Chemmy knows way better than me, but there are a lot of parallels there, excuse the pun, but there's the parallels of ski data and business data and how they should be used in a combined, united way.
Chemmy, how was that culture created where everyone in your team, as you said, you were in this cog, some had the same data and started all working together? How did that happen?
I mean, I probably had one of the smallest teams in the world because I was out there as a lone wolf. But it was very much like it was an individual sport with a huge conscious back team, and we all had to perform correctly. The physio had to make sure that all my injuries were, I was on top of all my injuries. The technician had to make sure that they were getting the skis right. And I mean, we got together every single day to say, right, every race, we had a post-race analysis of what we could have all done better. And normally, probably the outside world says, right, the commentators, the athlete can do this better. They should have done this better. They were slow because of this. Well, actually, there's far more that goes into it than just the athlete. Like you said, the Formula One, athlete driving the car, the driver, it's not just about him, it's about this huge back project. And we were lucky that I was a small enough team. But I remember, looking at Lindsay Bonds and the best in the world, there was a huge Red Bull team behind her. Someone was there just to take care of her nutrition. Someone was there just for her mindset pre-race, and post-mindset would be a different person. So I think sports people have always reached out to get the most elite people involved in the program, because they've understood that it's not just about that person, that 1 minute and 30 seconds when they push out that start gate. In fact, that everything is done by that point. When those beeps go and you're on the start gate, everything, all the back project and all the hard work is done. And that as a coach is the hardest thing now, because I have no control over that, how that athlete performs. But as long as I know that they have done everything in their cog to be their very best, then that's all. I have to take a breath out of it and just leave it to them and let them fly. And I think that as a business, you want to trust that. And the only way to trust that is to have really clear communication patterns in your huge cog. And obviously that gets bigger and bigger. But now we are in a phase where we're getting used to how technology can support that. I know this summer for Dave riding, his coach would log on to his Swift account. So he had direct real-time feedback of how many watts Dave was pushing on the bike. And then you could monitor his fatigue and kind of go back and see where that's come from. And I think there is technology around, and sometimes people are scared of using technology to support beliefs, but I've always loved that. I think it's great that someone gives me ideas on how I can perform better, but if there's stats behind it, you can't ignore data. So I think it's a really powerful tool to move forward with. I'm
nervous now that Peter and Anthony are going to be looking at my Zwift account and sending me reports with, as my kids' report says, EBI. You know, you could do better there, Mark. Final question, and bringing it back to business, is the pace of technology change has been astounding in recent years, and probably more so in the last year. How do organisations, CIOs watching this, be assured, Peter and Anthony, that Stratiam will keep pace with their technology change, because they're pushing through new changes and your technology is monitoring that change? How do they know that it's up to date with the other technologies they're iterating?
Well, it's a very good question, Mark. And I mean, certainly when we designed the architecture of Stratiam, which was 2 or 3 years ago, we actually built it, as I mentioned earlier, on a cloud platform. So it's built on GCP, and it's an open platform. So you know, we've got a number of APIs, many APIs that we already have out of the box, but also it's very easy to integrate new technologies. And again, it's one of the things that we do really well, is to blend and correlate the data together. So I think to answer your question, it is very open. It's built on a microservices architecture as well. So you can really move quickly. It's an agile platform that can adjust to the business as and when things change. Anthony, I don't know whether you've got anything you want to add to that.
Yes, it's built on microservices, and that allows us to always use the kind of the world-class tech at the time in a kind of component modular kind of way. So we're using the best kind of security around that for MFA and logging and stuff like that. If that technology was to take a shift to become something even better or even more efficient, the way we've built Stratiam in a kind of modular structure is we could take out that component and then add in the newest one. So we're always going to have that world-class architecture backed up by the cloud, super secure, best-in-class visualization, best-in-class data transformation, and all the other good stuff.
Let's have a look at the results from the wind tunnel testing.
Thank you, Mark. So I just wanted to talk through some of our findings in the wind tunnel. One of the kind of key insights of what we're talking through here is how marginal gains can add up to really exceptional improvements. So before I talk through the actual results, I'll just touch on what the data is all about. And one of the KPIs in a wind tunnel is a metric called CDA, which stands for coefficient of drag times area. It's basically a really simple way of measuring how aero something is. It's a good metric because it can apply for different size mass, different volumes, but it normalizes these down to a good comparative metric of CDA. So you could have something the size of an airship that might have a better CDA than something the size of a bicycle. So aerodynamic shape really impacts the CDA, the coefficient of drag times the area. For example, we've got these 4 objects here. The first one is a flat plate held up against the wind, which you can imagine with all that kind of buffeting going on, as you can see in that visual, it's got very poor and very high CDA. It causes lots of drag resistance. You can halve that by going down to a sphere, reduce that dramatically further by going to this kind of ovoid shape. And the ideal shape is this kind of streamlined shape, which is 5% resistance, so sort of 95% improvement on that kind of buffeting, a flat shape. And this is ultimately, I'm showing this slide because this is ultimately what a skier or cyclist or anyone who's trying to get their aero profile down is trying to do. Obviously, there's limits of what a human body can do, but in a wind tunnel, you're trying to get your body into that streamlined position, that kind of last shape in this slide here. So how this is measured in the wind tunnel, and excuse my bad sketch here, is we have a huge body of air coming through. The wind tunnel is almost the size of a small church or something like that. It's a beautiful wooden structure made from sort of this lovely wood, all carefully assembled together with really clean laminate surfaces. And it starts with a massive funnel, and that filters down to do two things. One is to kind of concentrate the air into the speed and velocity that you want. The other is to get that air really clean, to get rid of any kind of buffeting from the air. Then in the middle you put your subject. So I've got a photo here of Chemmy, and that subject could be anything. It could be bicycle, parasol, anything you want to test the aero properties for, kite surfboard, you name it. And then that's connected to what you call a strain gauge, which essentially measures the force on the base of your object. So we strap the skis down to the strain gauge, and the strain gauge is so sensitive it can measure a gram or two of force in either direction. And then that's all connected to your monitor rig, where we've got these kind of trained operators. So that's essentially what the wind tunnel setup looks like. And here's some pictures of this in action. A few other things to note is that it takes recording every few milliseconds. So every fraction of a second, it's taking recordings of the aero profile. We've got an example shot here of Peter and Chemmy in different positions. And the idea inside the wind tunnel is to do incremental testing. So we change just one variable at a time, and that's really key for doing any kind of testing, really. But in this really hyper-controlled environment in the wind tunnel, you can test just one thing at a time. So you change your gloves or your poles or slight tweaks to position, and we record how that's working. So whilst we've got clever computer set up within Silverstone's wind tunnel, it's also worth taking a manual data capture. So we also had this kind of working whiteboard, and this alongside the computer generated data is really valuable. And I guess the key thing here is allowing to work in an agile way. So we could start to see from the computer results what experimental sort of theories were coming through, but then it also allowed us to kind of work in an agile way to adapt that. So you basically could test new theories against your known results on the fly as they were coming through. So we've got Chemmy on the left there taking some results and maybe laying out some of our first experiment, and then the shot on the right is kind of maybe as that day's gone through a bit more, where we've got a few more results coming through with the run speed, comparison on previous one, setup, and you can probably see it was catsuit versus normal, baggy clothing and all that sort of stuff. And we also summarize that in an Excel type view. Again, I've not really got into any kind of proper data visualization yet. This is still just the data capture side of things. So then, crucially, we loaded this data into Stratiam. So yeah, we load up our data into Stratiam, and here you can see we've got some nice visualizations. We've got the kind of athlete name, that could be Chemmy, or we also did our CEO Peter in here, and we can log things like the wind speed, temperature, humidity, and all those kind of data variables, and put our stats in here. So this is kind of a stats-like view in Stratiam. What we would then want to do is improve those kind of the quality of those data visualizations. I'd probably then jump into something like this kind of visualization, where you can maybe see where the step changes are in the different positions. So we've got a regular skier going all the way down to sort of aero skier, and each step showing its performance improvements. So this is kind of nice. It's not the best view. Another view you might want is to use something like a waterfall chart. So this is a waterfall chart where you can see how each step has an impact on the improvements to CDA. So you can see the proportion that tuck gives versus the catsuit. So the catsuit gives a massive gain. Bendy poles is a fairly small gain, and then the aero helmet gives for us it was a larger than expected gain here. Another view of this, and this is probably one of my favorite visualizations, is actually showing the photo of the athlete. So here we've got Chemmy in the different positions. So the slowest is regular skier, and probably how I might ski down a hill. Not the best position, but very typical ski position. Going down to a decent tuck position, but still in the sort of regular tourist skier clothing. Then the really huge step change here is going into the catsuit. So the catsuit's got very good laminate flow properties. really good for aerodynamics compared to the flappiness that you might get of this warm winter. The tourist-like clothing, you get a huge step change in speed here down to catsuit. Then another 2-3% down to the bendy poles. It's hard to see in the visualizations and the photos here, but these poles in this first one are very straight, and this one are bent and designed to sort of fit that teardrop shape of the athlete's ski body when they're in that position. And then finally we go down to full aero position. So we've got aero helmet, bendy poles, full catsuit. So the total changes here were over 70%, but each one of these are kind of incremental changes, and this is key, and I think this is relevant to sport, business, and anything else you might want to be improving through incrementality. These tiny little step changes all add up to a big difference. And this is a nice visual to show it. Other ones we did, visualization here showing improvements to Chemmy's performance versus Peter's performance. What's interesting here is Peter had a better improvement. So Chemmy, as you'd expect, being an ex-Olympian, is better at all the positions and all the stages. She has a better CDA for all of these. But with coaching Peter a little bit into these different positions, the improvement for Peter's setup were better than Chemmy's improvement. Chemmy already started from a good position. One further visualization might be to show what each factor is as a contributory factor for aerodynamic improvement. So if I was a skier and I was aware of things like, for example, you might have constraints like budgets. How much can you spend on your boots and skis versus your clothing, catsuit, versus what kind of helmet type thing? If you had budgetary constraints, it's good to know what the potential gain from each of these areas are. So here it's very evident that catsuit is going to give you a huge gain for your money. Helmets, the aero helmets that we saw in the wind tunnel, probably you can ski down most courses in that aero helmet. It's very restrictive in how it's worn. And one thing that we didn't test was the boots and skis. Our configuration had skis bolted to the floor so that everything else in the experiment was consistent. But so this kind of 17% for boots and skis as a proportion of the whole aerodynamic effect or impact is an estimate in this case. To show how, so going back to this massive kind of performance improvements you get, or that Chemmy saw, to show how that might impact her Olympic results, I've got another view here of her at the Olympic Games at Whistler Creekside in Canada, where you can see Chemmy here came in 11th. And if you look, the scale here is in minutes, seconds, and microseconds. So if you look at her time difference, it was only about 2-3 seconds off the gold medal, and only a few percent points different. So this is where the kind of the relevance of the ski data and optimizing that for the incremental improvements could really make the difference between silver, gold, or even entering the event in the first place. So this really key optimization to do, and wind resistance is one of the key variables that a skier is facing, particularly in ski speed runs. When speed's an issue, aerodynamics is incredibly important. Just going back to Stratiam, so we've got our ski data in there. Just a little bit more about Stratiam. So Stratiam is a platform where you can visualize all sorts of different connected data sources. So in this example here, we've got some global cloud health data. For example, if you're monitoring how your various cloud platforms might be working, you could, for example, drill down and see how your Google systems are working, drill down and see when certain issues might have happened on that data. You can expand these out on the tables. And this is all browser-based software. We can get tons of different views and visualizations in here. This is a simple example where we've got kind of just breach data and cloud health data. I happen to have against my ski environment. We wouldn't normally put these data sets together, but crucially, this is a very nice data platform and portal that we could have ski data, maybe alongside you might have weather data or geo data or other stuff relevant to the athlete. Some other examples of Stratiam, just open another window here. We've got things like our security data, so you've got endpoint protection data. You can see how well devices are performing. We can see how various threats might have been triggered on a device setup. And there's all manner of charts and visualizations. I've showed some examples of what could be done with Chemmy's data visualizations, but we've got all sorts of wacky data visualizations here that shows how maybe different devices connect in a device ecosystem, and you can see how these could be explored in this way. We can connect it to ticket items from our service desk, so we can link our incident data from devices and issue data at device or network level. We can link that to actual ticket items, so we can say we can link that to the actual ticket item and whether that's been resolved, and so on and so forth. But yeah, we'll do a plug at the end of the webinar, but if anyone's interested in knowing more about Stratiam, we'd love for you to get in touch. We can either organize a bespoke demo for your particular data needs, or we can do something of a free trial as well. With Stratiam is most compelling when you see it with your own data set. Anyway, back to the ski example, and just to conclude from some of our findings here. So one of the key things is that the incremental gains can add up to the massive overall improvement. It's kind of an age-old saying that the small things really stack up, and that is true now more than ever. The same is true in sport, the same is true as in business. Achieving those incremental gains, you need to be good at controlling your variables and your data. Precise control over those variables is key. The Silverstone wind tunnel guys have an excellent setup, and they were really great at sort of guiding us through that data experiment. But the key to that kind of marginal improvement is the control over variables. But you can do that. You can do that in anything, as long as you kind of isolate the variable you're trying to improve. You can do that in any kind of walk of sport or business. Understand the interplay of how those variables interact together is also key. Yeah, those tiny margins that we're talking about, these 2-3% here and there, they actually can add up to a sort of difference between success or failure in business. When you're working at very tight margins, it can add up to success or failure. And of course, communicating the data is really powerful in terms of how you organize and control what's going on in the wider team. So those nice data visualizations are very powerful for communicating data. So to take this actual study further, we'd probably do a few more things. We were just looking at wind resistance, which, as I said before, is very relevant for skiers going downhill at very high speeds. But there are, of course, other things skiers need to be aware of. So sort of temperature properties, the snow surface properties, things like the ski resistance, acceleration out of your ski hut, and all those other factors add up to that sort of performance. So wind resistance is one of several that a skier needs to be aware of. I wouldn't be the person to talk about this, so you probably need to ask Chemmy in a bit more detail, but we've got various blogs on stratiam.cloud that talk through the various other factors that a skier needs to constantly be aware of. So for further information, there's a great Ski Sunday episode where Chemmy explains some real life practice of different area positions. You can see we've got our nicely sponsored Stratiam gates, and she's done a good run here where she's done real world conditions. So that's another important thing to note. What you might do in an experiment or a lab-like condition, like for example being in a wind tunnel, is going to be different to what you might actually get on the slopes. But Chemmy actually achieved comparable results where she repeated this study on the snow in different clothing, different tuck positions. So there's more information on that on Ski Sunday. Stratiam.cloud, we've got a load of blog posts. Some are guest written by Chemmy, myself and Peter, all about the wind tunnel testing we've done and some of the results. And as mentioned before, Silverstone Sports Centre or Engineering Hub, I think they call it, is a brilliant facility if you want to do your own wind tunnel testing on a pushchair, a pram, a parasol, a shop stand, or whatever. They can do wind tunnel testing for any kind of size object there. And of course, there's more information about today's webinar and our work with Chemmy on both the Stratiam website and the Intergence website. So I'll hand back to Mark, and thanks for your time here going through the data results.
Thank you for joining us on this webinar on Jumpstart Your Data. And as a special thank you to Chemmy Alcott and our guests Peter Job and Anthony Osborn for their insights today. These events thrive on feedback, and as always, we're looking for ways to improve each and every webcast that we do. So if you can spare a few moments to provide some feedback, that would be very much appreciated. In return for that feedback, there is a prize draw from leading ski apparel providers EcoSki of gloves, glasses, backpack, and of course board wax, all of which will jumpstart your ski performance when you can return to the slope. So do enter that, provide your feedback, and the details will be on your screen now. And if you'd like to learn more about Stratiam, go to stratiam.cloud, and there's a wealth of new information there that will help you understand the platform better. Thank you for joining us today. It's been a really interesting webcast. Good night.